The message from Phyllis arrived at 9 in the morning. I hadn't even finished my morning coffee when the phone rang, alerting me to a new notification. My first thought was that my daughter might be wondering what dress to buy me for little Elena's christening. I had promised not to upstage their family with my outfit, although I had never had such a habit. "Mom, I have something to tell you. I know you were looking forward to Elena's christening, but Warren and I have decided that you won't be on the guest list. I don't want you to ruin this special day." I reread the message 3 times before I understood its meaning. The cup of coffee in my hand shook noticeably, and a few drops spilled onto the white tablecloth. Cursing under my breath, I put the cup down and dabbed the stain with a napkin, as if that could fix anything. Only one thought ran through my head. My own daughter doesn't want me at her child's christening. She doesn't want me to ruin the day, me who gave her life 38 years ago. The phone rang again. A second message, like an afterthought. "It would be better if we talked about this later. I'm very busy getting ready." I didn't answer. What could I say? "Okay, dear, have a good time," or "How dare you do this to me?" Neither seemed right, so I just put the phone face down and went out to the back porch. It was a cool morning, despite the approaching summer. Sitting on the wooden steps, I looked at my small vegetable garden, where the first shoots of carrots and radishes were already beginning to sprout. My house was modest, but it was mine. After Jack died 10 years ago, I sold our big house and bought this little cottage on the outskirts of town. Phyllis said I was burying myself alive, but I just wanted to live within my means. The shrill whistle of the kettle brought me back to reality. I hadn't noticed how cold I had gotten sitting outside. Returning to the kitchen, I made some fresh tea and glanced at my phone again. The messages from Phyllis were still there, as if on purpose. This wasn't the first time my daughter had made it clear that I didn't measure up to her standards. Even when she was in high school, Phyllis started to be ashamed of me. I remember how she asked me not to come to parent-teacher conferences in my work clothes. I had just closed the laundry and didn't have time to change. "Mom, you don't want everyone to think my mother is a cleaning lady," she said. I tried to explain that owning a laundry wasn't something to be ashamed of, that the business had helped pay for her dance classes and summer camps, but Phyllis just rolled her eyes. Then it was her prom. I spent almost all my savings on a fancy dress and even got my hair done at a salon. Phyllis said I looked normal, at least not embarrassing. It was probably the most generous compliment I'd heard from her in the last 20 years. When Phyllis went to college, I thought our relationship would improve, that the distance would help her appreciate the care and support I had always given her. But no. She would come home with her new friends, the children of lawyers and doctors, and I would see her cringe with embarrassment when they had to sit on our worn furniture and eat from plain plates. "Mom, couldn't you have bought something nicer?" she would whisper when her friends went out to the backyard. "We're not poor." We really weren't poor. But we weren't rich either. Jack and I worked hard to provide our children with everything they needed, to give them what we never had, a good education, the opportunity to choose their own path in life. But Phyllis seemed to think that wasn't enough. Her wedding to Warren 5 years ago had been another ordeal. Phyllis had insisted that I wear a suit she had chosen, a pale blue one that didn't suit my figure or complexion at all. "At least once in your life, look like the mother of the groom on the cover of a magazine," she had said. I felt ridiculous and uncomfortable that day, but I smiled and pretended everything was fine. For her sake. Always for her sake. And now, the christening. The christening of my first granddaughter, whom I had seen only 3 times in the 2 months of her life. Every time, Phyllis found a reason to cut the visit short. Elena was tired. She was teething. It was almost feeding time. I picked up the phone and dialed Dora's number. If anyone could understand me right now, it was her. "You won't believe what just happened," I said as soon as she answered. Dora listened without interrupting, only clicking her tongue occasionally. When I finished, she launched into a long tirade about ungrateful children and how the younger generation didn't respect their elders. "You know what, Marion? You've let her walk all over you for too long. It's time to show her you have some pride." I sighed. "What do you suggest? Make a scene? Show up at the christening uninvited?" "No. I suggest you accept it as a fact and stop running after her like a puppy. She's a grown woman. She made her choice. Now it's your turn." After my conversation with Dora, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring into space. It started to rain outside, and the raindrops drummed on the glass as if emphasizing the rhythm of my thoughts. I thought about all the times I had given in to Phyllis, all the times I had swallowed my hurt for the sake of peace in the family, all the compromises I had made so as not to ruin her life with my presence. My son Benjamin was different. He called once a week, told me about his long flights, asked how I was doing. He wasn't ashamed of me. But Ben lived 4 states away and only came home for Christmas and Thanksgiving. And Phyllis was here, half an hour away, and yet she seemed so far away. I got up and went to the sideboard and took out a photo album. Leafing through the pages, I looked at little Phyllis, smiling with pigtails, on the bike we gave her for her 8th birthday. Teenage Phyllis with a serious face in her prom dress. Adult Phyllis with Warren at their wedding. I remembered them all as if they were different people. In a way, they were. I closed the album when the phone rang. It was Benjamin. It was as if he sensed that I needed support. "Mom," Phyllis called me. "She said you two had a fight over the christening." I snorted. "We didn't fight. She just told me I wasn't welcome. She says you made some comment about how they're raising Elena and it hurt their feelings." I tried to remember. 2 weeks ago, I had indeed said that maybe they shouldn't show a 2-month-old baby cartoons on a tablet so often, but it was just a passing comment, not a reason for such a reaction. "Ben, even if I said something wrong, is that a reason to not let a grandmother attend her granddaughter's christening?" He sighed. "No, of course not. I told her she was overreacting. But you know Phyllis. She's always been sensitive." "Sensitive? She's always been arrogant and easily offended. Those are different things." "Mom." "No, Ben. I'm tired of this. I've spent my whole life walking on eggshells around her, afraid of doing something wrong, and she still finds a way to put me in my place." There was a pause. I could hear Ben breathing heavily into the phone. "You're right, Mom. Phyllis has always been unfair to you. I just don't want you two to fall out completely." "I don't want that either. But I can't pretend everything's fine when she spits in my face." After talking to my son, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if I had spoken my mind and lifted an invisible weight off my shoulders. Perhaps for the first time in many years, I had voiced how I really felt about Phyllis, instead of sugarcoating my words. In the evening, I went out into the garden again. The rain had stopped, and the air was fresh. My neighbor, Edwin Frost, was digging in his vegetable garden across the fence. "Good evening, Marion," he said when he saw me. "How are you?" I wanted to respond with the usual fine, but instead the truth came out. "To be honest, it's been awful, Edwin." He straightened up, dusted his hands off the ground, and came closer to the fence. His wrinkled face expressed genuine concern. "Is something wrong?" And I told him, briefly, without unnecessary emotion, about Phyllis's message, about the baptism, about the years of difficult relations. Edwin listened, nodding and frowning from time to time. "You know, Marion, when my Joan was alive, we also had problems with our son. He thought we were too simple for his college friends. He was ashamed of us. But one day I said to him, 'Son, if you don't respect your roots, how can you respect yourself?' He was hurt and didn't talk to me for a month. But then he came back, and he apologized." "Phyllis isn't the type to apologize," I said. "Maybe, but you're the type who knows your own worth, aren't you?" I smiled at him over the fence. "Thanks, Edwin. I needed to hear that." Back in the house, I sat down at the table and opened my notebook. In the past, when I needed to sort out my thoughts, I always wrote. It helped me organize my feelings and see the situation more clearly. "Respect yourself," I wrote at the top of the page. What did that mean? Continue a relationship where you're not valued, accept insults as your due, or find the strength to say, enough? I always thought that being a good mother meant sacrificing yourself for your children, even when they're grown up, even when they're wrong. But what if the real sacrifice is allowing them to treat you without respect? What if, by accepting this treatment, I'm teaching Phyllis that it's okay, that it's normal? Feeling a sudden resolve, I picked up my phone and texted my daughter, "Phyllis, I accept your decision. I hope the baptism goes well. But know this, I will no longer tolerate disrespect. I deserve better. And if you can't give me even basic respect, then we should take a break from communicating. My finger hovered over the send button. Part of me was afraid that I would burn all my bridges. Another part knew that the bridges had long since rotted and were about to collapse on their own. I pressed the button. The reply came almost instantly. You always dramatize everything. I just want the day to go smoothly, without your comments and advice. And then I understood. I understood with crystal clarity. All these years, I had not been a mother to Phyllis, but an inconvenient reminder of her roots, of the fact that she came from a family of hard-working people, not from a wealthy suburb with white picket fences. I was what she was trying to escape, what she wanted to erase from her new, polished life. In that case, don't worry, I typed. You won't hear another comment or piece of advice from me. Good luck, Phyllis. I turned off my phone and put it in my desk drawer. I felt heavy, but strangely calm. It was as if I had finally taken off the mask I had been hiding behind for too long. That night, for the first time in many years, I slept soundly, without the usual anxiety about what I had done wrong in my relationship with my daughter, without thoughts of how to please her, without fear of being myself. In the morning, I woke up feeling that something had changed, not just in my relationship with Phyllis, but in me. It was as if I had finally remembered who I was, Marion Thornwood, not just Phyllis's mother, not just a grandmother who could be crossed off the guest list, a person who deserved respect. The day of the christening came too quickly. I woke up earlier than usual at 6 in the morning when it was just beginning to get light outside. My first thought was, today is my granddaughter's christening, and I won't be there to see it. A lump formed in my throat, but I forced myself out of bed. There was no point in lying there feeling sorry for myself. My morning ritual helped distract me. I made coffee, spread jam on toast, and turned on the radio in the kitchen. It was as if it were a normal Sunday, as if in 3 hours my only granddaughter would not be given a name before God, and I would not be there. The radio was broadcasting a church service. I turned off the radio and sat down by the window. The weather was clear, with sunshine pouring down from the sky, a perfect day for a family celebration. I wonder what dress they chose for Elena. Probably something expensive, maybe even with handmade lace. Phyllis always loved to show off her wealth. The phone on the table was silent. I checked it several times to see if it was dead or working, even though I knew perfectly well that my daughter wouldn't call. Her last message last night was crystal clear. We told everyone you were sick. Don't make this difficult. Was I making things difficult? My whole life had been spent trying not to make things difficult, to be convenient, not to cause problems, not to remind Phyllis that her mother was a simple woman who owned a laundry, not a graduate of a prestigious college with an impeccable pedigree. At 10 o'clock, when the service was supposed to begin, I put on a light summer dress, the one I had picked out for the christening, and went out into the garden. Instinctively, I reached for the weeds between the rows. Physical work always helped me think more clearly. The sun warmed my back as I methodically cleared the beds, one by one, row after row. I pulled out the weeds by the roots so they wouldn't come back. My hands were in the soil, my thoughts were far away. In the church, where my daughter now stands with her husband, holding a baby girl in a white dress. I wonder if Phyllis is explaining to the parishioners why the newly baptized girl's grandmother is absent. Or is it a relief for her not to have to introduce her mother, who had always been a source of embarrassment to her? "I knew I'd find you here," said a familiar voice. I turned around. Dora was standing at the gate with a paper bag in her hands. "I thought you might like some company and some fresh rolls." I straightened up and dusted my hands off the ground. "Shouldn't you be at your yoga class?" "Oh, come on," she waved her hand. "Those young instructors make us twist and turn like we're not 70 years old. Last time I almost broke my back trying to look like a dog with its head down." I couldn't help but smile. Dora always knew how to cheer me up. "Come in, I was just about to make tea." In the kitchen, Dora busily arranged the rolls she had brought on a plate while I brewed the tea. It was a familiar scene. We had done this hundreds of times over the years of our friendship. And yet today, something was different. A shadow of unspoken words hung between us. "So, how are you?" Dora finally asked when we sat down at the table. I shrugged. "Fine. Gardening." Marion Thornwood, don't you dare lie to me. I've known you for 30 years. I sighed, wrapping my hands around the hot cup. What do you want to hear, Dora? That I'm hurt? That I feel betrayed? That I can't believe my own daughter? My voice faltered, and I fell silent. Dora covered my hand with hers. That's exactly what I want to hear. The truth. Because you deserve better than how you're being treated. All this time, I thought the problem was me, I said quietly. That if I were different, more refined, more educated with different manners, Phyllis wouldn't be ashamed of me. That's nonsense, Dora snapped. You raised 2 children on your own after Jack died. You built a business from scratch. You gave them an education, and instead of gratitude, this is what you get? Benjamin isn't like that, I protested, because Benjamin has a conscience. Phyllis has nothing but ambition. I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew Dora was right. For years, I had justified my daughter's behavior, found explanations for her coldness, her shame at me. I thought she was just sensitive, that she cared about what other people thought of her. But now, looking at the situation from the outside, I saw what I had always refused to admit. Phyllis simply didn't respect me. You know what hurts the most? I finally said. I wouldn't even mind if she had just said, Mom, you don't fit into my new life. It would have hurt, but it would have been honest. Instead, she spent years making me feel inadequate, not good enough. What are you going to do now? Dora asked. I thought about it. That question had been running through my head since I got Phyllis's message. What next? I don't know. Part of me wants to just pretend nothing happened, wait for her to call, and she will when she needs something, and pretend everything's fine. And the other part? The other part wants to finally stop being a doormat that everyone walks all over. Dora smiled, that special smile she had when she was proud of me. You know, my grandmother always said, it's better to be alone than with people who make you feel lonely. We talked for almost 2 hours. Dora told me about her daughter, who also didn't always treat her with the respect she deserved, but then grew up and changed. I listened, but deep down, I knew that Phyllis was 38 and unlikely to suddenly realize how unfair she had been. When Dora left, I went back out into the garden. I could see the scene before my eyes. The church, Phyllis and Warren holding Elena, the priest saying the words of blessing, the guests smiling, and I wasn't there. I had simply been erased from the scene. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out, expecting to see Dora's name. Maybe she had forgotten something. But the screen lit up with Benjamin. Hi, son, I answered, trying to sound normal. Mom, I just talked to Phyllis, he began without preamble. She said you didn't come to the christening. I gasped. What did she say? That you were offended by some little thing and decided not to come. That it's your way of getting attention. I felt cold inside. So now it was my fault? I was the one who didn't show up for an important family event on a whim? Benjamin, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, your sister wrote to me herself saying I wasn't welcome. She said she didn't want me to ruin the day. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Benjamin frowning as he processed the information. You can check the messages on my phone, I added. They're still there. Mom, I believe you, he sighed. It's just, God, why would she lie to you? Probably because it's easier than admitting she kicked her own mother out of her granddaughter's christening. Another pause. Then Benjamin said quietly, I don't understand how she could do that. It's just cruel. Those words, spoken by my son, hit me harder than the whole situation. Cruel. Yes, that was the word. What Phyllis had done wasn't just rude or harsh. It was deliberate infliction of pain. You know, Mom, I talked to her the other day. Benjamin continued after a pause. She complained that you were meddling in their lives with parenting advice. I told her it was normal for grandmothers to give advice. But she said something like, you don't understand what she's like, as if you were some kind of monster, not the woman who raised us alone after our father died. And what did you say to her? That she was wrong, that you always supported us, even when we did stupid things. Remember when I wrecked your car? You didn't yell or punish me. You just said, well, we'll have to work to pay for the repairs. I smiled. Benjamin was 17 at the time, and he had secretly taken my old Honda to go for a drive with his friends. He came back with a dented fender and tears in his eyes. I really didn't yell. What was the point? The mistake had already been made. Instead, we made a plan together for how he would work after school to pay for the repairs. "How long did it take you to earn the money for the repairs?" I asked, feeling warm inside at the memory. 3 months, Benjamin smiled. "The hardest 3 months of my life. But you know, I learned a lot during that time." "Like what?" "That actions have consequences, that you have to take responsibility for your mistakes, and that my mom is one hell of a strong woman." Now it was my turn to be silent. My throat tightened. "Thank you, Ben." "Don't thank me for the truth, Mom. Listen, I know I don't usually get involved in your relationship with Phyllis, but what she did this time is too much. You don't deserve to be treated like that." We talked for another 20 minutes. Benjamin told me about his new route through the south of the country and how beautiful the sunsets were there. He promised to stop by next month when he was flying nearby. I listened to his deep voice, so similar to his father's, and felt grateful that at least one of my children saw me as a person and not a burden. After talking to my son, I decided to take a walk. The day was drawing to a close, but it was still light and warm. I walked along the familiar streets of our neighborhood, nodding to neighbors, stopping occasionally to exchange a few words. No one asked about the baptism. Apparently the news hadn't spread yet. Or maybe people were just tactful enough not to rub salt in the wound. My feet led me to the park where I often walked with Phyllis when she was little. The same trees, the same benches. Only the playground had been modernized. Plastic slides instead of metal ones. Rubber flooring instead of sand. I sat down on a bench, watching young moms and dads play with their children. One young woman in particular caught my attention. She was patiently helping a toddler who had just learned to walk climb the steps of the slide. She supported him when he stumbled and praised him for every step. Her face was filled with love and pride. That's how I was with Phyllis. Endlessly patient, always ready to support her, always proud of her achievements, no matter how small. When did it all change? When did my daughter decide that I wasn't good enough for her new life? Maybe it started in high school when Phyllis became friends with kids from wealthier families, or in college, where the difference in social status became even more apparent, or when she met Warren, whose family owned a successful business and had connections in local politics. But no, the problem started earlier, in the little things I noticed but ignored, in how Phyllis asked me not to come to school events in my work clothes, in how she never invited friends over, preferring to go to theirs, in her comments about my simple manners and outdated views. I saw it all, but I chalked it up to teenage rebellion, a natural desire to separate from her parents. I believed she would grow out of it, that one day she would understand that my love for her never depended on how prestigious my job was or how expensive my house was. But she didn't grow out of it. On the contrary, over the years, the gap only widened. And now, the final break. The baptism I wasn't invited to, and the lies Phyllis spread, claiming that I myself had refused to come. I got up from the bench and slowly headed home. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold, a beautiful sunset at the end of a difficult day. When I got home, the first thing I did was check my phone. No messages from Phyllis. Why would there be? The christening had probably gone exactly as she had planned. Flawless, without prying eyes or inappropriate comments from her mother, who could have ruined the celebration. I made myself a light dinner and turned on the TV, not so much to watch as for background noise. The loneliness that usually didn't bother me felt more acute today. Something inside me broke today. Not my heart. No, that had been broken long ago, little by little, with every dismissive word or glance from my daughter. Today, the illusion broke. The illusion that one day everything would work out on its own, that Phyllis would suddenly see me not as a source of embarrassment, but as a person who loved her unconditionally. Before going to bed, I took out a photo album, an old habit that usually brought me comfort. But today, looking at the smiling little Phyllis, I felt only fatigue. Tired of trying to be someone I never was and never will be, the perfect mother from a magazine with impeccable manners and designer clothes. I closed the album and made a decision. No more trying to fit into Phyllis's life on her terms. No more apologizing for who I am. No compromises with my own dignity. If Phyllis wants me in her life, well, the door is open. But only on terms of mutual respect. And if not, I'll learn to live with the emptiness. After all, it's better to be alone than to be someone's backup option, only to be called upon when needed. With that thought, I went to bed. A new chapter in my life lay ahead, not necessarily an easy one, but my own, and there was no place in it for humiliation and contempt. The first week of silence was the hardest. I constantly checked my phone, waiting for any message from Phyllis, even if it was angry or accusatory, as long as I knew she still considered me part of her life. But the phone remained silent. No messages, no missed calls. It was as if an impenetrable curtain had fallen between us. Benjamin called every other day. He didn't mention my sister directly, but I could tell he knew about the ongoing silence. He talked about his flights, the cities he was passing through, the roadside diners with surprisingly good food. It was his way of saying, "I'm still here, Mom. I'm with you." By the end of the second week, I stopped waiting. I woke up one morning and realized that for the first time, I didn't reach for my phone to check my messages. Instead, I stared out the window at my garden, where the first summer flowers were blooming, and thought, what can I do for myself today? That question became my new morning ritual. What can I do for myself today? Not for Phyllis, not for the granddaughter I wasn't allowed to see, for myself. That morning, the answer was a trip to the city library. I had always loved to read, but in recent years I rarely found the time. I was too busy trying to be the perfect mother and grandmother, adjusting to Phyllis's schedule, choosing my words carefully so as not to upset her. The library greeted me with coolness and silence. I wandered among the shelves, enjoying the peace and freedom of choice. No one rushed me, reminded me that we were late, or rolled their eyes if I lingered over a particularly interesting book. I returned home with a whole stack, novels I had wanted to read for a long time, a book on gardening, several biographies of strong women. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, almost joyful. It was like taking off a heavy coat on a hot day. I started reading right away, settling down on the back porch with a cup of tea. From time to time, I looked up to watch the wind rustle the leaves on the trees and the squirrels scurry along the fence. The world around me changed with each passing day, becoming brighter, fuller, more alive. Or maybe I was just starting to notice things that had always been there. In the third week, I ran into Edwin Frost at the grocery store. He was standing in front of the canned soup aisle looking confused. "Having trouble deciding?" I asked, stopping beside him. He turned around and his wrinkled face lit up with a smile. "Marion, it's good to see you. Yes, I can't decide. All these cans look the same. What are you looking for exactly?" "Something with chicken, but not too salty. The doctor says I need to watch my blood pressure." I helped him choose a few types of soup and suggested some homemade spices he could add to improve the flavor without adding extra salt. Edwin listened with genuine interest, even taking a worn notebook out of his pocket and writing down the recipe for a simple chicken soup I suggested. "You know," he said as we walked to the checkout, "I've never been very good in the kitchen. Margaret always did the cooking. After she died, I had to learn, but I still only know how to make the simplest dishes." "Are you talking about your wife?" I asked cautiously. "Yes, she died 7 years ago. Cancer." He said it simply, without emotion, but I could see the echo of old pain in his eyes. "I've been living alone ever since. My children offered to take me in, but I refused. I didn't want to be a burden." "I understand," I nodded. "My son offered too, but I like my independence." We left the store and walked slowly down the street. It turned out that Edwin lived only 2 blocks away from me. I knew him as a neighbor, but I had never talked to him for so long before. "How's your daughter?" he asked suddenly. "Did you sort out that misunderstanding with the christening?" I tensed up. Of course, in a small town, news travels fast. "No," I replied after a pause. "We haven't spoken in almost 3 weeks." Edwin didn't express surprise or condemn either me or Phyllis. Instead, he just nodded. Sometimes distance is exactly what you need. It gives you a chance to see things more clearly. Or realize that there is no situation anymore, I added. We reached his house, small but well kept, with a neat front yard where roses grew. Edwin stopped at the gate. "Listen, Marion, I'm going to make one of those soups this weekend. Would you like to join me? We can sit on the porch if the weather's nice." I hesitated for just a second. I'd love to, Edwin. Saturday? Saturday's perfect. How about 1 o'clock? It's a date. On my way home, I felt a strange excitement. Not romantic, no. At my age and after so many years of widowhood, those feelings had long since dulled. Rather, it was the excitement of a new friendship, of getting to know someone who had been just another face on the street for so many years. When I got home, the first thing I did was check my phone. It was a habit that was hard to break. 2 messages. One from Benjamin asking when would be a good time for him to come by next week, and another from Dora asking if I wanted to go to the movies. Nothing from Phyllis. Strange, but I felt relieved. Every day without her reproaches, without having to weigh every word, was like a breath of fresh air after a long stay in a stuffy room. I replied to the messages, smiling to myself. Life went on, and maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Saturday came unexpectedly quickly. I spent the morning in the garden, weeding the beds and tying up the tomatoes. Working outdoors had always been a pleasure for me, and lately it had become a real therapy. There was something soothing about the earth, its reliability, its constancy, its ability to give new life even after the harshest winter. By noon, I was done with the garden, took a shower, and changed into a light summer dress. Not too dressy, but not every day either, just right for lunch with a neighbor. I even put on a little lipstick, a habit I had given up in recent years when my only conversation partners were shopkeepers and Phyllis, who frowned if I looked too bright. Edwin met me at the gate. He was wearing a fresh shirt and his gray hair was neatly combed. He smelled of cologne, a light woody scent. "Welcome," he said with a smile. "I hope you're hungry. I think I may have overdone it a bit." The interior of his house was as well kept as the exterior. Simple but sturdy furniture, a few paintings on the walls, mostly seascapes. On the mantelpiece were photographs, a younger Edwin next to a woman whose eyes smiled as warmly as her lips, 2 grown children with their own families, an old black and white photograph of a lighthouse on a rocky shore. "That's the lighthouse I worked on," Edwin remarked, following my gaze. 32 years, the best years of my life. "It must have been a secluded place," I remarked. "That's why I liked it. Just you, the sea, and the sky. Well, and Margaret, of course." She loved the solitude as much as I did. We moved to the porch where the table was set with steaming soup in deep bowls, fresh bread, and a vegetable salad. Nothing fancy, but it all looked delicious. "I followed your recipe," Edwin said, pointing to the soup. "I hope it's edible." The soup was surprisingly delicious, a little salty, but with a pleasant aroma of herbs and a hint of spice. "You're very good," I praised him sincerely. "For someone who claims he can't cook, you're not bad." Edwin beamed at the compliment. "It's all thanks to a good recipe, and maybe a little bit because I wanted to impress my guest." I laughed, feeling my cheeks flush. How many years had it been since a man had said something like that to me? 10? 15? The conversation flowed easily and naturally. Edwin talked about his life on the lighthouse, the storms he had weathered, the rare but precious visits from his children. I shared stories about the laundry, about regular customers who had become almost friends, about the challenges of running a small business in an era of big corporations. "How did you end up in this business?" Edwin asked when we moved on to dessert, a simple but delicious berry pie. "Out of necessity," I replied. "After Jack died, I had to make a living somehow. I had no higher education, only experience as a saleswoman and seamstress. And there was a laundry for sale in town, old and almost bankrupt. I took out a loan, bought it, and slowly built up the business." "That sounds impressive," Edwin said sincerely. "Not everyone would dare to do that, especially during a difficult period in their life." I shrugged. I had no choice. My children were still teenagers, and I had to feed them, clothe them, and prepare them for college. There is always a choice, Marion. You could have given up. You could have looked for an easier way, but you chose the hardest way and you succeeded. His words touched me. There was no pity or condescension in them, only sincere respect, something I never got from Phyllis. "Tell me about your daughter," Edwin asked unexpectedly. "If you want to talk about it, of course." I thought about it. Did I want to talk about Phyllis? About the pain she caused me? about how her rejection hurt me on the deepest level? Phyllis was always a difficult child, I finally said. Demanding, with high standards. It was always important to her to live up to other people's expectations, to be accepted in certain circles. And you didn't fit into those circles? Not at all. I was just a mother who worked with her hands, not her head, who didn't know which forks to use at formal dinners or how to pronounce the names of French wines. Edwin nodded understandingly. I know the feeling. My son was ashamed of me for a while. He said that being a lighthouse keeper wasn't a real job, but hiding from real life. And what changed? He grew up. Edwin smiled and realized that real life isn't necessarily offices and suits, that you can find happiness and meaning in all sorts of places. I'm not sure Phyllis will ever come to that realization, I sighed. She's 38 and still judges people by their social status. It's never too late to change, Marion. Edwin covered my hand with his. But it has to be her decision, not yours. His touch was warm and reassuring, not demanding, not insistent, just letting me know I wasn't alone. We sat on the porch until evening. The sun slowly sank below the horizon, painting the sky shades of pink and gold. The air was filled with the evening coolness and the scent of blooming roses. "Thank you for a wonderful day," I said when it was time to leave. "It's been a long time since I've had such a pleasant time." "Likewise," Edwin replied, walking me to the gate. "Maybe next time you'll cook dinner. I promise I won't be too picky." I smiled. "I'd love to." "Next Saturday?" "It's a date." On my way home, I felt a lightness in my chest. It was as if the weight I had been carrying all these weeks had been lifted a little. It hadn't disappeared completely. No, the pain of being separated from my daughter was too deep to simply vanish. But now there was something else alongside it. Hope? Possibility? Just the feeling that life wasn't over, that there might still be good days ahead. At home, I checked my phone. Nothing from Phyllis, as usual. But instead of the usual pain, I felt a strange calm. If she had decided to cut me out of her life, well, that was her choice. I couldn't force her to love me, respect me, need me. All I could do was continue living my life, finding joy and meaning in it, regardless of her decisions. The next few days flew by. I met with Dora, went to the library, worked in the garden. Edwin sometimes stopped by to help with the heavy work or just chat over the fence. We exchanged recipes, discussed books we had recently read, and shared news about our children. I told him about Benjamin, his job as a truck driver, his kindness and reliability. Edwin shared stories about his daughter, who lived in California and was an interior designer, and his son, who had followed in his footsteps and worked for the Coast Guard. "They call every week," he said proudly, "and they come home for the holidays. It doesn't always work out, of course. Everyone has their own life. But they try." I felt a pang of envy. How nice it would be if Phyllis also called every week, came for the holidays, just kept in touch. But that thought no longer caused the same sharp pain. Rather, it was a slight sadness, a resignation to the fact that it might never happen. On Thursday, Edwin invited me for a walk in the city park. We walked slowly along the shady paths, watching children playing in the playground, couples sitting on benches, elderly people feeding pigeons. "You know what I realized when I retired?" Edwin asked as we stopped at a small pond. "That I spent my whole life rushing somewhere, afraid of missing something, and the most important thing was right in front of me. Simple moments like this, the sun on the water, good company." He looked at me, and there was so much warmth in his eyes that I felt my cheeks flush again. "You're good company, Edwin," I said quietly. "So are you, Marion. Very good." At that moment, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. Not as a mother, not as a grandmother, not as a former laundress, but as a woman. As a person with thoughts, feelings, and a history. Walking home after our stroll, I thought about how strange life is. A month ago, I was sure that losing contact with Phyllis was the end of the world. That without her, without being able to see my granddaughter, my life would lose all meaning. But here I am, walking down a familiar street, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on my skin. And inside me, there is no emptiness, no despair, but a quiet, calm acceptance. Yes, I miss Elena. Yes, it hurts to think that she is growing up without knowing her grandmother, but I will no longer allow that pain to define my life. At home, I made some tea and went out to the back porch with my cup. The garden, which I had been tending so diligently over the past few weeks, was a delight to the eye with its bright colors and lush green vegetables. Bees buzzed over the flower beds, gathering nectar. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. The world continued to exist regardless of my personal dramas, and I continued to exist too. More than that, I was beginning to live again, discovering new opportunities, new connections, new joys. Of course, thoughts of Phyllis and Elena did not disappear completely. Sometimes, especially at night, I lay awake wondering how my granddaughter was growing, whether she was saying her first words, whether she smiled like Phyllis did at her age. Sometimes I would pick up the phone, dial my daughter's number, and not press call. Pride? Fear? Or just the realization that it wasn't time yet? But even in those moments of weakness, I no longer felt the same despair. Yes, I would have preferred a world where my daughter and granddaughter were part of my life. But if the choice was between constant humiliation, having to apologize for who I am, and loneliness, I chose the latter. On Saturday, exactly 1 month after the baptism, I invited Edwin to dinner. I prepared my signature meatloaf, baked vegetables from my own garden, and baked an apple pie using a recipe I had inherited from my mother. We had dinner in my little garden under an old apple tree. I lit candles and laid my best tablecloth on the table. Not to impress, Edwin was clearly not the type to judge people by their tableware or manners. I just wanted to make the evening special. "To new beginnings," said Edwin, raising his glass of wine. "To new beginnings," I echoed. We talked about everything under the sun, the books we loved as children, the places we dreamed of visiting, our hopes for the future. We didn't mention my Phyllis or his children. It was as if we had silently agreed that this evening was just for the two of us. When it got dark, we went out onto the porch. We sat side by side on an old bench, watching the stars come out. "You know," Edwin said suddenly, "I'm glad our paths crossed, even if it took everything that happened." I understood what he meant. If it hadn't been for the breakup with Phyllis, I probably wouldn't have looked for new connections, new relationships. I would have been too busy trying to live up to her expectations, to be the convenient grandmother who was always there, but never the center of attention. "I'm glad too," I replied sincerely. "Sometimes something good comes out of the most painful events." Edwin took my hand, and we sat there in cozy silence, listening to the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of passing cars. At that moment, I realized that I might never see Elena grow up. I wouldn't teach her how to bake cookies. I wouldn't tell her stories about her mother as a child. I wouldn't hold her hand when she took her first steps. The thought still hurt, but I also realized that I could live with that pain, that it didn't define me, didn't limit me, didn't prevent me from finding joy in other aspects of life, in friendship, in new relationships, in the simple pleasure of being myself, without having to constantly apologize for it. If Phyllis ever decides to come back into my life, that's fine. I'll be happy. But it has to be based on mutual respect, not because she needs something from me. And if that doesn't happen, well, I'll go on living, building my life day by day, finding meaning and joy in it, regardless of her decisions. Edwin's hand in mine was warm and reassuring. Perhaps it was a sign that sometimes you have to let go of the old to make room for the new, that sometimes the most unexpected twists of fate lead to the most wonderful discoveries. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not only resignation to the situation, but real hope. Hope that there were many good days ahead, filled with meaning and warmth, even if Phyllis and Elena weren't there. The phone rang early in the morning. I was just finishing breakfast, looking through a new gardening book I had borrowed from the library. Outside, it was a bright summer morning. The beginning of July was warm and sunny. I could already hear the voices of the neighborhood children running out to play in the yard before the midday heat set in. I glanced at my phone screen and froze. Phyllis! Her name lit up the display like a warning of an approaching storm. 5 weeks had passed since our last conversation. 5 weeks of silence and an impenetrable wall between us. My heart began to beat faster. My first impulse was to answer immediately, but something made me hesitate. Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm down. The phone continued to ring, insistently demanding attention. Finally, I swiped the screen. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom?" Phyllis's voice sounded tense, even slightly breathless. "I'm glad you answered. I need your help." No hello, no how are you. No sign that she had missed me or even thought about me all these weeks. Just a direct statement of need. "Good morning, Phyllis," I said calmly. "What's wrong?" "I'm in a complete mess." Jenny quit yesterday without warning. She just left a note and left. And I have an important presentation at work today. Warren is out of town until the weekend, and I have no one to leave Elena with. Jenny was the nanny they hired right after their granddaughter was born, a young student who was working part-time babysitting. I had seen her a couple of times when I visited Phyllis, always polite, but a little aloof. "I'm very sorry to hear that," I said, surprised at my own calmness. "How can I help? Can you watch Elena today?" There was a pleading note in her voice. "I wouldn't ask, but it's really important. It's a presentation that will determine whether I get a promotion." I was silent, thinking about the situation. Of course, I wanted to see my granddaughter. Over the past few weeks, I had imagined how she had changed, whether she had started smiling more, whether she recognized familiar faces. Elena wasn't to blame for the conflict between me and her mother, but at the same time, something inside me resisted. I remembered all the times Phyllis had only turned to me when she needed something and then distanced herself again as soon as the crisis was over. Was I really ready to return to that pattern of relationship? "Are you still there?" Phyllis asked impatiently. "Yes, I'm here." Just thinking. "What's there to think about?" Irritation crept into her voice. "All you have to do is sit with her for a few hours. It's not that hard." "It's not about how hard it is, Phyllis," I replied calmly. "It's about the fact that we haven't spoken in over a month. You crossed me off the guest list for my own granddaughter's christening, and now you're calling as if nothing happened because you need my help." There was a pause. I could almost see Phyllis biting her lip, a habit she had had since childhood when she felt cornered. "I know I didn't do a very good job," she finally said, clearly choosing her words carefully. "But this isn't about me or you. It's about Elena. She shouldn't have to suffer because of our differences." Manipulation. Pure manipulation. I almost laughed at how predictable this tactic was. "You're right," I said. "Elena shouldn't suffer, so I'll keep an eye on her today." "Great!" Phyllis sounded relieved. "I'll bring her over in an hour, if that's okay with you." "Yes, that works. But Phyllis..." "Yes? We need to have a serious talk. Not today. You have your presentation and you'll be busy. But soon, about what happened and how we move forward." Another pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in my daughter's head as she searched for a way to avoid this conversation. "Okay," she finally said. "We'll talk, but not today." Agreed. After the call ended, I sat motionless, staring at the phone in my hand. Phyllis had called. After all these weeks of silence, after everything that had happened, she had called. Not to apologize, not to mend fences, but because she needed a favor. Part of me wanted to be indignant, to refuse, to insist that we resolve our issues first, but another part understood. This was an opportunity to see Elena, to spend time with her, to be a part of her life, and perhaps a chance to start a new dialogue with Phyllis. I got up and started getting ready for my granddaughter's arrival. The guest room had long since been converted into a nursery, with a crib, a changing table, and toys that I had bought with such joy when I found out Phyllis was pregnant. Elena hardly ever used the room because Phyllis rarely left her with me. I checked that everything was in place, dusted, and changed the bedding in the cot. I took a teddy bear off the shelf that I had bought before Elena was born, soft, with kind button eyes. Exactly an hour later, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and went to open the door. Phyllis was standing there with Elena in her arms and a huge bag over her shoulder. My daughter looked tired. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back into a messy bun instead of her usual perfect hairstyle. She was wearing a strict business suit, probably for the presentation. But my eyes were fixed on Elena. She had changed noticeably over the past few weeks. Her cheeks were plumper, her gaze more thoughtful. She looked at me with her big milk chocolate eyes, just like Phyllis's at her age. "Hi," said Phyllis, stepping inside. "Thanks for agreeing to help." "Of course," I replied, holding out my arms to Elena. "Hello, little one. Do you remember your grandmother?" Elena studied me intently, then suddenly smiled, hesitantly, but so warmly that my heart skipped a beat. She remembered me. Despite the weeks of separation, she recognized me. "Everything you need is in the bag," Phyllis said quickly, handing me the baby. "Diapers, a change of clothes, bottles of milk in a cooler, vegetable puree for lunch. She usually sleeps for about an hour and a half in the afternoon. She loves having books read to her. There are a couple in the side pocket. I'll be back around 6, maybe a little later if there are questions after the presentation." "We'll be fine," I assured her, rocking Elena in my arms. "Isn't she cute?" Elena babbled something in response and grabbed my finger. Her little hand was so warm, so trusting. "All right." Phyllis glanced at her watch. "I have to run. Are you sure you'll be all right?" "Phyllis," I looked her straight in the eye. "I raised 2 children. I can handle 1 granddaughter." She blushed slightly but quickly regained her composure. "Of course, I'm sorry. I'm just nervous about the presentation." "Everything will be fine," I said, surprised at how easy it was to offer words of support despite everything that had happened between us. "Go and show them what you can do." Phyllis paused for a moment as if she wanted to say something else, but changed her mind. Instead, she quickly kissed Elena on the top of her head and headed for the door. "I'll call if I'm running late." And she left, leaving Elena and me alone. The little girl looked around with interest, examining the familiar but half-forgotten place. "Well, sweetie," I said, kissing her chubby cheek, "what shall we do today?" The day flew by. Elena turned out to be a surprisingly calm child, curious, smiling, and easily adaptable. She enjoyed playing with the toys I had prepared for her, listened attentively when I read children's books to her, and didn't even fuss during lunch. When it was time for her afternoon nap, I put her in her crib, sang her a lullaby, the same one Phyllis used to sing, and quietly left the room. Elena fell asleep almost instantly, with a slight smile on her face. I sat down in an armchair in the living room, enjoying the moment of silence, and suddenly felt tears running down my cheeks. They weren't tears of grief or resentment, but of the overwhelming love I felt for this little creature in the next room. They were tears of realization of how much I had missed in the past few weeks and how much more I might miss if Phyllis and I didn't find a way to communicate. The doorbell snapped me out of my thoughts. Quickly wiping away my tears, I went to open the door, expecting to see the postman or a delivery person. Phyllis had promised to be back in the evening. Standing on the doorstep was Edwin with a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. "I hope I'm not late," he said with a smile. "I just saw these flowers and thought of you." "Edwin," I couldn't help but smile back. "Thank you, they're beautiful, but I have a slight change of plans today. Phyllis brought Elena over and I need to sit with her while she's at work." Edwin's face showed surprise, then understanding. "Oh, so she got in touch with you after all? That's unexpected." "For me, too," I admitted. "Come in, Elena's asleep. We can talk quietly." We went into the kitchen, where I put the flowers in a vase and made tea. Edwin sat down at the table, watching me intently. "How are you feeling?" he asked when I sat down opposite him. I thought about it. How did I feel? The joy of seeing my granddaughter was mixed with wariness toward Phyllis and uncertainty about the future of our relationship. "It's hard to say," I finally replied. "On the one hand, I'm happy to spend time with Elena. She's grown up so much and become so smart. On the other hand, Phyllis only called because she needed help. She didn't apologize or try to talk about what happened. She just used me as a fallback when everyone else fell through." Edwin nodded understandingly. "And you're worried that once the crisis is over, everything will go back to the way it was?" "Exactly," I said, wrapping my hands around the cup, feeling its warmth. "That as soon as Phyllis finds a new nanny or Warren comes back from his trip, I'll be invisible again. Or worse, I'll be the target of her criticism and contempt again." "You need to set boundaries," Edwin said firmly. "Clear, specific conditions under which you are willing to be a part of their lives. Like what, for example? Only you can decide that, Marion, but I think they should include mutual respect, recognition of your role as a grandmother, regular contact with your granddaughter, not just when it's convenient for them. I thought about his words. He was right. Clear boundaries were needed, not ultimatums or accusations, just a clear understanding of what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. I'm afraid that if I push too hard, she'll just cut me off completely, I admitted. That's a risk, Edwin agreed. But think about it. What's worse? Losing a relationship that hurts you, or continuing to endure humiliation for the sake of fleeting encounters with your granddaughter? I didn't have time to answer. Elena's crying came from the next room. Apparently, she had woken up and didn't see a familiar face nearby. I'll be right there, I said, getting up. Of course, go ahead, Edwin nodded. I think I'd better be going. I don't want to interrupt your conversation. You're not interrupting, I objected. Stay. You can meet Elena. He smiled but shook his head. Another time. Today you need to focus on your granddaughter and think about the conversation you have to have with Phyllis. I nodded, understanding his logic. Edwin stood up and touched my hand lightly. Just remember, you deserve respect. No less than anyone else. With that, he left, and I hurried to Elena, who was crying. She was sitting in her crib, clutching the teddy bear I had given her, and sobbing quietly. There, little one, I cooed, picking her up. Grandma's here. Everything's fine. Elena immediately calmed down, buried her nose in my neck and sighed softly. I rocked her, humming a lullaby, and thought about Edwin's words, about boundaries, about self-respect, about what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. The rest of the day was spent playing games and reading books, cooking and feeding, talking quietly and singing songs. Elena turned out to be a wonderful conversationalist. She listened attentively, responded with smiles and babbling, and seemed to really understand what I was saying. By 6 o'clock, I started glancing at the clock, waiting for Phyllis to return. At 6:30, the phone rang. Mom? Phyllis's voice sounded excited. I'll be late. The presentation went great, and my boss invited me to dinner to discuss the details of the project. This is a big opportunity for me. Could you watch Elena for a couple more hours? I looked at my granddaughter, who was playing peacefully with blocks on the carpet. Of course, I replied. We're having a wonderful time. Thank you, Phyllis breathed with relief. I'll be home around 9, maybe a little later. Phyllis, I said before she could hang up, we still need to talk. Tonight. Pause. Then a quiet sigh. Okay, Mom. Tonight. After her call, I made dinner for myself and a light snack for Elena. We ate together at the kitchen table, me in my usual spot, her in the high chair I had bought in anticipation of visits like this. Feeding my granddaughter turned out to be one of the most enjoyable things I had done in a long time. Watching her explore new foods with curiosity, delight in familiar flavors, and wrinkle her nose when she didn't like something. In her every gesture, in every expression on her face, I saw echoes of little Phyllis, the girl who once loved me unconditionally, without reservation. When it was time for her evening bath, I filled the little tub with warm water, added some baby bubble bath, and carefully placed Elena in it. She was immediately delighted, clapping her hands in the water and laughing at the splashes. You love water, don't you? I smiled as I lathered her soft skin. Just like your mom when she was little. She could sit in the bathtub for hours until the water was completely cool. Elena seemed to understand that I was talking about her mother. She looked at me with her big eyes, as if trying to imagine Phyllis as a little girl. Your mom was a very brave girl, I continued, washing the soap off her shoulders. Always first on the slide, always ready to try something new. But she was stubborn, too. Once she got something into her head, there was no changing her mind. I paused, remembering. You know, in some ways she hasn't changed. She's still just as stubborn, just as determined. But somewhere along the way, she decided that I wasn't good enough for her new life, for your life. Elena splashed water on my blouse and I laughed. You're right, little one. This isn't the time for sad thoughts. Let's dry off and get ready for bed. After her bath, I dressed Elena in a clean sleep suit I found in my bag and settled down with her in the rocking chair. I read her a story about a little rabbit who got lost in the forest and found his way home by following the stars. Elena listened with her eyes wide open, sometimes pointing at the pictures and babbling something in her own language that only she understood. When the story was over, she was already nodding off. I put her in her crib, tucked the blanket around her, and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Sleep, little one. Grandma is here." Elena smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. I stood nearby, watching her breathing become even and deep, her features relax, and her slip into the world of childhood dreams. At moments like this, all the resentment and disagreements with Phyllis seemed insignificant compared to the miracle of this new life. This little person, in whom my blood, my family, my history lived on. And yet I understood that for a healthy relationship with my daughter and granddaughter, I needed to set clear boundaries, not out of malice or revenge, but out of self-respect, and for the long-term well-being of all of us. At exactly 9 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. I quietly left the nursery, trying not to wake Elena, and went to answer the door. Phyllis looked different from the morning. Her eyes were shining, her movements were energetic, and every gesture exuded the confidence of a person who had achieved success. "How did it go?" I asked, letting her into the house. "Great," she beamed. "They love my project. They say it's exactly what the clinic needs to attract new patients, and they practically promised me a raise." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "You've always been talented." Phyllis froze for a moment, as if she hadn't expected such a reaction. "Thank you, Mom. How's Elena? Was she difficult?" "No, she's a wonderful child. We had a lovely time. She's asleep now." "Great." Phyllis glanced at her watch. "Then we should probably get going. We have to get up early tomorrow and—" "Phyllis," I interrupted, "we agreed to talk, today." She sighed but nodded. "Yes, you're right. Let's talk." We went into the kitchen, the place where we had had so many conversations over the years. Good ones and bad ones, happy ones and painful ones. Phyllis sat down across from me, straightening her back and folding her hands on the table, the posture she took when she was preparing for a difficult conversation. "I'm listening," she said. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Too much depended on this conversation. "Phyllis," I began, "what happened at the christening, that was the last straw in a long history of neglect. For years, you've made me feel like I'm not good enough for your new life, that I'm a source of embarrassment, not pride, that my manners, my job, my lifestyle are all things to be ashamed of." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand. "Please let me finish. I don't want to blame you or make you feel guilty. I just want you to understand that the way you treated me hurt me. It hurt me deeply, and I can't and won't live like this anymore." Phyllis was silent, her face impenetrable. "I love you, Phyllis. I always have and always will. You're my daughter, but I also respect myself enough not to let anyone treat me like a second-class citizen, not even you." I paused, watching her reaction. Phyllis's face remained impassive, but I noticed her fingers tighten slightly. "I want to be a part of your life," I continued. "I want to see Elena grow up, to be a real grandmother to her, but only on terms of mutual respect, not as a fallback option to be called upon only in times of crisis, not as an inconvenient necessity that is tolerated out of politeness, but as a person who has value in and of herself." Phyllis finally looked up and met my gaze. "What do you propose?" she asked quietly. "I propose we start over," I replied, "with a clean slate, without old grudges and grievances, but with new rules. I want to see Elena regularly, not just when you need a babysitter, but on a set schedule. I want you to respect my opinions and feelings, even if you don't agree with them. And I want you to never again exclude me from important events in Elena's life." I took a deep breath and continued. "In turn, I promise to respect your decisions as a mother. I won't interfere without being asked, and I won't criticize your parenting methods. I promise to be a support, not a burden. I'll help when you need it, but I won't impose myself when you want to be alone with your family." Phyllis was silent, thinking about my words. The only sounds in the kitchen were the ticking of the old wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. "Mom," she finally said, "you talk as if I deliberately tried to hurt you all these years." "I don't think it was deliberate," I replied gently. But that doesn't change the fact that you often made me feel inadequate, like I was some annoying remnant of your past that you couldn't get rid of, but could keep at a distance. That's not true, Phyllis objected, but there was no conviction in her voice. No? I looked her straight in the eye. Then why did you embarrass me in front of your friends? Why did you ask me not to come to school events in my work clothes? Why did you insist that I wear a suit that didn't suit me to your wedding? And why? My voice faltered. Why didn't you let me come to your granddaughter's christening? Phyllis lowered her eyes, her cheeks flushing slightly. I just wanted everything to be perfect, she whispered, to fit in, so no one would look down on us. Who, Phyllis? Who would look down on us? Your friends? Warren's parents? People whose opinions matter more to you than your own mother's feelings? She didn't answer, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. Perhaps for the first time in all these years, she was really thinking about her actions, about how they looked from my perspective. I'm not a perfect mother, I continued more gently. I made mistakes raising you and Benjamin. Maybe I didn't give you everything you wanted, but I loved you with all my heart, and I still do. Phyllis looked up, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. I know, Mom, she said quietly. I know you love me, and I love you too. It's just hard to show sometimes. It was probably the most sincere confession I had heard from her in many years. It wasn't an apology, that was still a long way off, but at least it was an acknowledgement that love existed between us, beneath all the layers of hurt and misunderstanding. As for your conditions, Phyllis continued, straightening up and gathering her thoughts, I think they're reasonable. Elena should know her grandmother, and yes, we can arrange regular visits, maybe once a week, or what do you think? Once a week sounds good, I agreed, and maybe sometimes I could take her for the whole day when she's a little older. Yes, that would be good. Phyllis nodded. And as for important events, I promise I'll never exclude you again. What happened with the christening, that was wrong. I understand that now. She didn't apologize directly, but I saw genuine regret in her eyes. For Phyllis, with her pride and stubbornness, even admitting she was wrong was a big step. Thank you, I said simply. We sat in silence for a few minutes, digesting the conversation, its meaning, its potential implications for our relationship. You know, Phyllis finally said, today, when I looked at your number on my phone, I wasn't sure you would answer. After everything that happened, you had every right to ignore my call. I thought about it, I admitted honestly, but then I decided it was an opportunity to change things and a chance to see Elena. She missed you, Phyllis said unexpectedly. All these weeks. Sometimes she would look at your photo on the mantel and smile as if she recognized you. My heart ached at those words. The thought that Elena remembered me, recognized me even after weeks of separation, was both joyful and painful. I missed her too, I said, every day. Phyllis nodded and suddenly looked at her watch. It's late, she said. We should probably go. I'll wake Elena up. Why don't you stay the night, I suggested. It's late and Elena is sleeping so soundly, it would be a shame to wake her up and drive her across town. Phyllis hesitated. I don't have anything with me for the night. I can lend you some pajamas and everything you need, I said, and Elena seems to have everything she needs for tomorrow in her bag. Well, if you don't mind. Phyllis looked uncertain, but she didn't refuse outright, which was progress. I'm all for it, I smiled. It'll be nice to wake up in the morning and have breakfast together, like old times when you still lived at home. A nostalgic smile flashed across Phyllis's face. Do you still make those blueberry pancakes? Of course. Would you like some for breakfast? Yes, that would be great. It was a small, almost imperceptible moment, talking about pancakes, smiling, reminiscing about better times. But to me, it meant more than all the formal agreements about meetings and rules. It was a hint that somewhere deep down, Phyllis was still that little girl who loved her mother's blueberry pancakes and wasn't ashamed of that love. We put Phyllis up in the guest bedroom next to the nursery where Elena slept. I gave her my softest pajamas, a spare toothbrush, and showed her where the clean towels were. "It's just like old times when you came home from college for vacation," I remarked as I helped her make the bed. "Yes, only now I have a daughter," Phyllis smiled faintly. "It's strange how things change, and how some things stay the same." Before wishing her good night, I paused for a moment in the doorway. "Phyllis, I want you to know that no matter what happens between us, no matter what differences we have, you will always be my daughter, and I will always love you, unconditionally." She nodded, and I thought I saw tears glistening in her eyes again, but it was hard to tell in the dim light of the room. "Good night, Mom," she said quietly. "Good night, sweetheart." I returned to my bedroom with a feeling I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't complete relief or unqualified joy, more like cautious hope. Phyllis and I had taken the first step toward reconciliation, toward a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenience or obligation. I wasn't fooling myself. There was still a lot of work ahead. One conversation wasn't enough to fix years of hurt and bad patterns. There would be more challenges, misunderstandings, maybe even new conflicts. But now we had a foundation to build on, an understanding that we both wanted to be in each other's lives, no matter what. Before going to sleep, I went to the window and looked at the starry sky. Somewhere out there, among those distant points of light, perhaps there were answers to all our questions, solutions to all our problems. But for now, we were searching for them here on Earth, day after day, conversation after conversation, trying to find our way to each other through all the barriers we had erected ourselves. And perhaps the most important thing I realized that day was that I was no longer alone in this search. That Phyllis, with all her flaws and complexities, was also looking for a way back to the mother she once loved unconditionally, before life and ambition came between us. With that thought, I went to bed, listening to the quiet breathing in the house where, for the first time in a long time, 3 generations of women in our family were sleeping. Grandmother, mother, and child, connected not only by blood, but also by this fragile new understanding that was beginning to form between us.